As we all know, the NFL playoffs are right around the corner just 2 weeks away. In the NFC, the Eagles, Vikings, 49ers, and Cowboys have clinched. However, there's still plenty of teams in the hunt. Today, I'll be running through each of those teams and their chances of making the playoffs. Before we start this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more NFL content. First things first, let's start off with the teams that are eliminated from contention, which are the Bears, Cardinals, Falcons, and Rams. There is zero possibility that any of these teams make the playoffs. But let's take a look at the teams in contention, starting off with the New York Giants. The Giants were not even supposed to be here before the season. They've overperformed this year, and honestly, we have to give credit to them. The Giants currently sit at 8-6-1 and hold a 90% chance of making the playoffs. For the Giants to clinch, all they would need is one single win and they book their ticket to the playoffs. Not only would they clinch the playoffs with the win, but they would officially lock up the 6th seed, as they can't get the 5th seed because they're out of reach of the Cowboys, and they can't drop to 7 because they would have the tiebreaker over the Commanders. The Giants also play the Colts next, who have been absolutely horrible and have a QB who threw for more interceptions than completed passes last game. It's safe to say that the Giants are probably going to make the playoffs and end up with the 6th seed. However, in terms of the 4th seed, the NFC South is pretty tight, as the Saints, Panthers, and Bucks can all win the division. The Panthers currently sit at 6-9 with an 18% chance to make the playoffs. Meanwhile, the Saints currently sit at 6-9 with a 3% chance to make the playoffs. The reason why the Panthers' chances are higher is because the Panthers currently hold a 3-1 division record compared to the Saints' 2-3 division record. Also, the Saints happen to play the 13-2 Eagles next week. In order for either of these teams to make playoffs, they would need the Bucks to lose both of their next games and would need to win both of their next games. However, next game is actually huge. The Bucks currently sit at 7-8 with the Panthers sitting at 6-9, and they happen to play each other this Sunday. If the Panthers were to beat the Bucks, they would sit first in the division, as they would have beaten the Bucks twice. If this scenario were to happen, the Panthers would then be 4-1 in the division, and the Bucks would then be 3-2. So basically, whoever loses this game isn't going to make the playoffs. In order for the Saints to clinch, the Saints would need to beat the Eagles and beat the Panthers. They would also need the Bucks to lose out. If this happens, then the Panthers would sit at 7-10, Bucks would sit at 7-10, and the Saints would sit at 8-9. However, that is extremely unlikely. In order for the Bucks to make the playoffs, they need to beat Carolina, and they would clinch the 4th seed versus the Cowboys no matter what. The Bucks currently hold a 68% chance to make the playoffs. Now, this is where it gets interesting. There are currently 4 teams that still have a chance at the 7th seed. After the Commanders lost to the 49ers, they sit at the 7th seed, however, now hold a 34% chance of making the playoffs. The Seahawks sit at 7-8 with a 23% chance, the Lions sit at 7-8 with a 23% chance, and the Packers sit at 7-8 with a 29% chance. And that's because if they win out and the Commanders lose, the Packers would make the playoffs. They also have a higher chance than the Lions because they're projected to beat the Lions, and if the Packers beat the Lions in Week 18, assuming that the Lions and Packers both win next week, that Week 18 would be the decider. Therefore, if the Packers win, they'd sit at 9-8 with the Lions sitting at 8-9. However, they'd also need the Seahawks and Commanders to lose a game. As for the Lions, they essentially need the same scenario as the Packers, except just in their favor. However, they'd also need the Seahawks to lose, as they lost a tiebreaker to them. As for the Commanders, they would essentially need to win out to clinch playoffs, as one win is cutting it very close. And as for the Seahawks to make the playoffs, they would need the Commanders to lose a game and win out. For the Seahawks to win out, their chances would go from 23% to 68%, as they have a 4-2 record in the division, and the Commanders also face the Cowboys, which they're projected to lose. Personally, based off schedules, I think the Seahawks are going to end up making the playoffs. The Seahawks have lost 5 of the last 6 games. However, the Jets have been poor, and obviously the Rams, even though they just crushed the Broncos, have not been good this season. So here are my predictions for the playoffs. I have Philly getting a bye at the 1st seed, with the Niners finishing with the 2nd seed, and that's because I think the Vikings are going to lose to the Packers next week, and the Niners should beat the Raiders next week, as they're not even starting Derek Carr. Also, the Cardinals are horrible, and the Niners face the Cardinals in Week 18, so I do think the Niners are going to win out, and I do think that the Vikings are going to lose one of the next 2 games, giving the Niners the 2nd seed and giving the Vikings the 3rd seed. As for the 4th seed, I do think that the Bucks will beat the Panthers and finish with the 4th seed, even though the Panthers have already beat them. You just have to trust in Brady. The 5th seed is automatically locked for the Cowboys, and as for the 6th seed, I do think the Giants will finish with the 6th seed, as they verse the Colts next week and only need 1 win to make the playoffs. Nick Foles just had a horrible performance versus the Chargers, and the Giants should be winning that game. And for the 7th seed, I do think that the Commanders will lose a game. They verse the Cowboys, and I do think the Seattle Seahawks will win out, as they verse the Jets, who haven't been that good and have been having QB problems, and they also verse the Rams. I understand that Seattle have lost 5 of the last 6 games, But honestly, I just feel them making the playoffs. The Rams have been brutal, and the Jets are also cold. So it's definitely a possibility. Which means heading in the playoffs, Philly would have bye in the first round with the Niners at the 2nd seed versus Seattle at the 7th seed. And I do think the Niners will win that game just because they have beat the Seattle Seahawks twice this season. And Seattle have been extremely poor in both those games. Which means at the 3rd seed, the Vikings will face the 6th seed Giants. And honestly, to be completely honest with you, the Giants could have won that game versus the Vikings. I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants win this game. When the Giants make the playoffs, they always happen to do something. They're the underdogs. They lost by a 61-yard field goal. They could have beaten the Vikings in OT. And honestly, the Vikings, even though the record shows that they're 12-3, they haven't been that convincing this season. So I'm actually going to go with an upset and have New York beating Minnesota in Minnesota. I mean, they'd be used to the weather after all. And as for the Bucs versus Cowboys, Tampa is at home, and they've already beaten the Cowboys this season. I also don't like Dak Prescott in the playoffs, and I do think Brady will step it up in the playoffs. So I'm going to give the Bucs the win here. Some may be surprised, but hey, never doubt Brady. Which means the Eagles versus the Giants and the Niners versus the Bucs in the 2nd round. The Eagles have already slapped up the Giants this season, and coming off a bye, I don't think that the Giants will upset Philly, so I do think Philly will book a ticket to the NFC Championship game. And as for the 49ers at home versus the Bucs, the 49ers absolutely demolished the Bucs already this season. I can't see how the Bucs could possibly win this game based off of the regular season game against the 49ers. So I'm definitely going to give the 49ers the win here, which means a conference championship matchup of the Eagles versus the Niners. Now, I'm a Niners fan, so I'm not going to pick a winner. I don't want to be biased. I'm going to just leave that up in the air, but I do think that these two teams will be in the championship game by the end of the playoffs. That's it for me, though. Let me know how you think the NFC will pan out, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe for more NFL content.